So the last couple of years we've hosted a conference, and last year was carbon, the year before was hardwood management. This year, whereas 5 years since we started Creek Barton Private Land Partnership, we wanted to kind of go back to the communities, town halls, just to touch base and have a little bit more of a conversation with people about where we're at, how things are going, and where you see us going in the future. So that's kind of what this is about. The online version that we're doing here right now is something we've thought about doing before, but we've never actually done. So we'll see how it goes. I guess we've got 17 people, so that's pretty good. It was a little bit hard we weren't sure what to expect from this, so we'll see how it goes. So Bill is out there in the ether as well. I'm Kerry Easthouse. Bill is, as you know, the manager with CBPP. I work directly with Forest Fiber, but most of the time I'm working on things related to the Cape Breton Private Land Partnership. So we're going to be covering a few things this evening. The first thing was just to touch base back to where we were in 2014. Have a quick look at where we thought we were going, what we were doing, just to set the context. A progress and sort of current status report. So Bill's going to be going through that, hopefully, if we don't have any technical difficulties, but we'll see. And just some observations on how things are going and how he sees things. We'll touch base on a few sort of industry-related things that are out there in the ether right now. Refreshment break, I guess that doesn't necessarily make sense here, but maybe we can all have a coffee at the same time. But we did want to kind of touch base back with you to get some feedback on where you see us going in the future as members and woodlot owners on Cape Breton. The last part of it was a woodlot management intro, so you're welcome to stay for this if you want, or you can tune out if it's very basic stuff, but something that a few new members have requested before that we go through, and it's just a very basic introduction to some forestry and woodlot related things. So with that, I guess we'll dive right in. Just a comment, I guess, where there are so many, if we have everybody kind of talking at the same time, it might get confusing. So if you do have questions or comments, there's a little chat window over on should be showing up on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see a little arrow and you can drop that down and then you can see whatever questions are being asked, or you can ask questions or comments posted to the group. And if we start getting some questions, we'll stop and try to address some of those. And we'll see how that goes. We are going to try, we're actually recording this. We had a few people request that they weren't able to make it this evening, and could we record it and post it on the website or somewhere where they could get to it later. So we're going to try that. Again, no promises, but we'll give it a try and see how things go. So we started up, I guess, officially opened back in the spring of 2014. We had 4 open houses around Cape Breton to kind of present the concept of these service areas and talk about what we were hoping to do with the Cape Breton Private Land Partnership and sort of spread the word. It all stemmed from a lot of discussion at the time around lack of engagement among woodlot owners. So we were seeing this as, I guess, Forest Fiber at the time, that we were doing all these management plans, but really there wasn't very much work or activity, forest management types activity resulting from that. So we actually carried out a survey, and what it all boiled down to is that, yeah, it's fine to go and do a management plan and get people excited, but if nobody's there to help them and follow up with them, then it can lead to both dissatisfaction among the people, the woodlot owners themselves, that there isn't that support, and just a lack of movement forward with management plans. So through discussions with the province and other woodlot owner groups, we moved forward with this service area concept, the idea being that it would be a way of providing services to woodlot owners. There's all kinds of groups and different ways of doing it, but basically all of them, we try to fit them under this one umbrella called the Cape Breton Private Land Partnership. So we submitted the proposal to DNR. I guess it was ECBC at the time. We received some funding to kind of set the business plan up and a lot of the systems in place. Because the idea would be that although the partnership has an office in Port Hawkesbury, all of the work is done by members and consultants and people associated with the partnership throughout Cape Breton. So we needed a system to kind of manage that process. Then spring, I guess May of 2014, we actually launched, and we've been moving forward with it ever since. So just conceptually, the partnership, so it's made up of existing landowner organizations, and it acts as a central body to administer and assign work for woodlot owners throughout Cape Breton. So it's a way of organizing things and making sure that we're carrying things out as efficiently as we possibly can. Members pay a fee to belong, but receive enhanced services in exchange. So once you sign up, there's a nominal fee to sign up, of course. And then the province covers some of the cost of carrying out services, and the woodlot owner carries out or bears some of that cost as well. There's a lot of discussion around forest management standards at the time, and we had an advisory group set up, and the general consensus was that if we were going to attract a lot of woodlot owners to the group, we needed to be seen as providing services and quality of service and forest management that was kind of above and beyond what was currently happening out there. North Inverness, Bedeck Valley, they kind of act as the main extension providers on the northern side of the island, so Victoria and Inverness counties. There wasn't any equivalent type of groups in Richmond and Cape Breton counties, so we've got some independent consultants that kind of help us with things in those areas. Forest fiber, we provide sort of the technical back-end type services, as well as the FSC certification. If successful, the model will be applied to other regions of the province, and that actually is happening. This was mission and vision stuff from the time. Through CBPP, Cape Breton forest landowners are engaged, thriving, and contributing to the rural community through the sustainable management of their woodlots. I think we're still working towards that. Obviously, that's a very long-term goal, but it is still the type of thing that keeps us moving forward with this. I am going to quickly try and change the presenter to Bill, and so bear with us for 1 minute. The screen may flicker.
I think so. Hang on.
No, it's not going to work out. So Bill's going to be off the hook for a little while. So I'll pinch hit him in here for him. So the typical process, I think probably most of you are aware. I'm not sure if there's any non-members or people out there that out in the ether, but for the most part, there's probably just a review. Most of the time, we get a call from a landowner maybe they've recently inherited the property, or for some reason they're spurred to action with regard to managing their forests. Typically, Bill will go and do what we call a rapid plan with them. So it's a very quick overview of their property, lots of maps and whatever information is available digitally for the property. Nobody's actually visited the site at this point. He'll also have a discussion with the woodlot owner about what their options are. Is moving forward or joining the partnership a good fit for them, and so on. For those that are interested in joining, and typically it's, I think probably about 50% of the woodlot owners that contact us do eventually end up joining the program and moving forward to get a management plan done. Right now, there's a charge associated with getting a management plan done, so it's $500. I think when we first started out, it was $200. We had to change that just to keep things, to get more plans done and balance out the revenue sources. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on here. Once that's done, often the first thing that's typically done is some silviculture. Usually there's some type of silviculture, whether PCT or planting, that needs to be caught up on. And at some point, some properties move on to harvesting as well. So this is right now. Actually, these numbers are a bit off, but roughly there's about 400 active members of the partnership, which account for about 600 management plans that we've currently have active within Cape Breton. Typically, we're doing between 60 and 80 new management plans, or bringing in new members, 60 to 80 new members per year. 2016 was a big year for some reason or other. But typically we're in that 60 to 80 average range. At first we were limited most by available funding through the province. So each year we talk to them about how many new woodlots we'd like to add. And then a budget is developed based on that. The last couple of years, to be honest, it's been a bit of a struggle to get new members. We suspect it's just we're terrible at advertising ourselves, but we're as of probably the last year. Typically, if somebody is interested in joining and getting a management plan, there's not much of a wait time in order to get that done. This map is actually all of Nova Scotia. It's just to give you some sense of the level of activity here in Cape Breton. So those red dots you see, or little red squares and so on, are just woodlots under FSC management or some type of active management with a management plan in Nova Scotia. So the vast majority, the highest percentage of those, or percentage of the areas, by far Cape Breton, and that's a result of CBPP. Eastern mainland, there's a fair number. There's a long history of forest fiber doing management plans in that area. And Western and Central Nova Scotia, there's a smattering there as well. There is a new initiative in the West that we'll talk a little bit about more, so hopefully we'll start seeing more of those red dots show up down at that end of the province. In terms of prescribed treatments, there's already, even after just 5 years, close to 20,000 hectares of prescribed treatments out there on member woodlots. You can see the distribution of them there. A fair bit of clear cut that's been prescribed. PCT probably is the second biggest prescription. And just to be clear, so these are areas prescribed. They're not actually areas completed. The area completed would be a much, much smaller number than this. Finding the capacity to get this work done has probably been our biggest struggle. So we've got lots of work to be done, but finding the contractors and the funding to get the work done continues to be a struggle. PCT, getting that done probably isn't too bad. Clear cutting, if you've got a larger area of softwood, it's not too hard to get that done. But a lot of the other treatments, it is very difficult. Silviculture, so since we started, it's we have about $1.5 million worth of silviculture completed on member woodlots. There's 3 different sources of funding that we can access. The largest one is actually through Port Hawkesbury Paper. So on Cape Breton, we have an agreement with them where we carry out most of their silviculture obligation on private on Cape Breton. So each year we meet with them, we get a budget and complete that work. The other source, I guess three other sources in a way. So ASF, which is a group out of Truro, Association for Sustainable Forestry, we get a budget from them every year, a smaller budget, probably I think about $80,000. And then Nova Scotia Power, we have an agreement with them where we carry out their silviculture obligation. A lot of that happening on, actually gets carried out on Cape Breton. And that's a good one because there's funding there for hardwood, whereas under the PHP one, it's very difficult to get funding for any hardwood treatments. And then some funding as well we get, I guess, indirectly through Northern Pulp. So if they do work harvesting on a member woodlot, typically we can be in touch with them and get some planting done through them. Deliveries. So this is sort of wood harvested and recorded deliveries from CBPP woodlots. This year we're at about 5,000 tons delivered off of member woodlots so far. Obviously it's only early. 2018, 2017 were big years, 25 and 30 some thousand tons. 2015 and 16 obviously are ramping up to those numbers. So it's yeah, it's been ramping up. I guess as a reminder to people, if you do have any harvesting done, please be sure and let us know that it's when the contractor or you start up, because it's important to know in terms of getting the $1 a ton that we do from Port Hawkesbury Paper. So we need to make sure that it's registered with them so that we can claim that back. So this is more as an example to give you a sense of where the money comes and goes. This was the 2018 actual financial result. So I'll go through some of these, and again, the details it's more to give you a sense of the scale and where the money's coming from and where it's going. This is aside from silviculture funding. So for us, silviculture is an in-out type of thing. It happens within the same year, and any money we receive to do silviculture is carried out in the same year that we take it in. So there's not really much sense in showing it in this presentation. So in terms of income last year, membership dues, so this is the $25 per member per year, plus membership dues from contractors, and which is a little bit more, and member organizations, Forest Fiber, Quebec Valley, North Inverness, was a little bit over 7,000. Deliveries to PHP, so this is the $1 a ton that we receive when FSC certified wood from our member woodlots gets delivered to Port Hawkesbury Paper. That was a little over 30,000. And again, the numbers you saw before were based on a calendar year. And if you're thinking about the deliveries in the previous slide or two, that was calendar year, and this is fiscal year, so it's a little bit different. Silviculture admin. So with the Port Hawkesbury Paper silviculture budget, any of the registered buyers, when they do carry out silviculture to meet their obligation, there's sort of a 10% admin allowance there. So in the case of the Port Hawkesbury Paper budget, they actually were allowed to keep that 10%. So that's where that $9,000 comes from. Management plan charge, this is the $500 per management plan. That was about $30,000 last year. So for a total income, sort of direct member derived or internally derived income of just a little bit short of $80,000. Expenses, so salary, office, admin, advertising, all of those type things, was about a little over $150,000 last year. External extension cost, $123,000. So that is when we hire external consultants to go and do forest management plan cruising and those types of things. That's what that is. Landowner management plan rebate, that is, so I'm sure most of you are aware, if you paid $500 for your management plan and then you sell wood to Roxbury paper, the first $500 of that dollar per ton goes back to you to cover that to your management plan. So that's what that is. For a total expense of $277,000. So the difference each year, based on an agreed budget in probably about May of the previous year, is covered by Lands and Forestry, so the province basically, which last year was about $200,000. So overall, aside from silviculture, the province put in $200,000 and members put in about $80,000. The sort of long-term goal that we've been given by the department is to try to get to about 50%. So where 50% of our income is actually derived by internal sources. I think for 2019, we're budgeting to be at about 33%. So we are getting there, and compared to many other groups, I think we've been pretty successful at it. So this is just some sort of background that Bill typically would provide. It is getting to be a little bit of a surprisingly, considering there's 7,000 woodlots on Cape Breton. Bringing in new members at times can be a bit of a challenge. I'm sure it's just a matter that we need to get the word out better. We're not very good at that. Most forestry people aren't. But that's something that we're struggling with. And typically, I think word of mouth has been our best advertisement. Most people that do come to us looking for help, it's because their neighbor told them about it, their neighbor, their brother, whatever. And as members, we certainly encourage you to help us spread the word about those types of things. Just as a comment, often, and this is something probably you should look into as a member. If you're not currently receiving the forest resource exempt tax rate, which is 25 cents per acre, and you do have a management plan and you've got activities planned or recently completed, you should definitely talk to property valuation about getting that changed. We do see people coming in for that reason, and typically it's I think fairly easy if you have a management plan to get that status on your woodlot changed. So it can be, excuse me, depending on the woodlot, it can be a very significant difference. The other, I guess, tax-related thing is, well, I think we're planning to talk about that a little bit later, but the intergenerational tax transfer, that's something that we don't hear a lot of people talking about, but is pretty significant. So I'm going through this fairly quickly. If there are any questions or comments, you can shout them out. I think I've got things muted, but I may just unmute people here for a minute. Just to see, unless we're getting too much background noise, and then I'll turn it back off. But if you do have any questions or comments, you can just put it in that chat window there. And hopefully we'll see it if this is working properly. Yeah, so there are, if you consider a woodlot to be forested in over 10 hectares, then there's actually over 6,000 woodlots on Cape Breton. That number is, I think at one time, it was commonly understood that there was about 30,000 woodlots in Nova Scotia. But when we did the calculation here last year or the year before, the number we believe is probably closer to 50,000 now. And a lot of that is, of course, properties being subdivided. So it's not like we're creating more land, but there are more woodlot owners as we go forward. So the point being, there's still lots of potential for growth there. We are noticing, and Bill feels this the most, where we've grown to 400 members, and each member often has, things they would like help with. It's getting to the point where we probably need to bring on more staff in order to meet that demand. So far, Bill has been fairly able to do that. However, there are things starting to get missed. And obviously, it's very important that we keep you as members sort of engaged and working on your woodlots and so on. So that's something that I think in 2019 we need to work on for sure. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here before too long. So that's it in terms of an update on CBPP. Again, if you have any questions, you can shout them out. Moving on to sort of some updates on different issues. One of the things is Eastern Mainland service area. So the idea 4 years ago, I guess, was that CBPP, of course, was a pilot project. And if successful, the concept would be rolled out across the province. Since then, Western Nova Scotia, there's the Western Woodlot Services Cooperative has been formed, and it's sort of loosely based on what's happening here in Cape Breton. In Central Nova Scotia, there's a number of groups talking about moving forward with a proposal for a service area there. It's a little bit more complicated in that region because there are a lot of existing woodlot owner groups and service providers there, whereas in Cape Breton and Western Nova Scotia, that wasn't so much the case. CBPP in last fall proposed moving forward with an expanded Cape Breton service area. So sort of creating two districts, a Cape Breton one and then an Eastern Mainland one, which would include Antigonish and Dyersborough counties. Excuse me, sorry. So the idea being that we could share the cost. So a considerable portion of the cost of doing this is maintaining an office and staff and so on. So by keeping one office in Port Hawkesbury and using existing systems, our feeling is that we could do it fairly quickly and easily and cost effectively. So it would not only reduce the cost of starting up a new service area on Eastern Mainland, but it would also help CBPP by spreading some of those overhead and admin over more woodlot owners. The proposal that we made was that there would be one sort of business manager at the office, based out of the office in Port Hawkesbury, and then a forest technician assigned to Cape Breton and one to the mainland. So that would be a way of increasing boots on the ground for Cape Breton as well. And then we would expand the existing board of CBPP to include mainland representation. So that was proposed in the fall. It's kind of on hold, so we're still waiting on a decision from the province as to whether that's going to go ahead. And realistically, we're probably not going to know anything until this summer. So we'll see. Something else you may have heard of and that CBPP has been kind of loosely involved with is the Breton Forest Innovation Co-op. So if you remember, you may have seen some emails about a cooperative being formed to purchase the former Finewood flooring facility in Middle River. That was probably, I guess over a year ago now. So a board and co-op was actually formed back in the winter of 2018. The facility was purchased. So it's for the most part the buildings. There's a little bit of equipment there, but all of the wood processing equipment was sold already. But there was so financing through Nudon. They stepped up to provide a very favorable loan. This last summer, a manager was hired, Stacy Carroll, who some of you may have met. So she's been there since August, I think. And the work thus far has been around basically developing a business plan moving forward. And then we're putting a funding proposal is being put together and should be ready here, I would say, by early summer, late spring, early summer, something like that. So if a lot of the ideas being kicked around is the concept is that the facility will be used to benefit and promote and incubate small wood-based businesses. So purchase, production, and sale of live edge slab wood. That one actually has already started. So there is some stuff that's been purchased and kiln dried is ready for sale. There is probably a fair bit of potential there because there is a really good story to be told about the wood, especially if we're sourcing it from local woodlots and small family woodlots. Biochar, biochar production and sale. That one is a little bit riskier, but there is a lot of potential there. So if you're not sure what biochar is, I'd certainly encourage you to go and Google it. It is very interesting. So there's a lot of agricultural applications, but a big one right now is actually in the makeup industry. So where there was a lot of microplastic microbeads that were recently banned for use, and biochar is one of the potential ways of doing the same thing in a healthier and more environmentally friendly way. So it's produced using very low grade wood, and the heat produced can be used for heating the building and other things as well. So there's some potential there, and discussions with a couple people at Cape Breton University who are familiar with it. Firewood production and sale is another one that's being looked at. Rental of equipment production space to wood business startups. So there is, if you haven't been to the facility, there is actually a lot of space there. Good shop space that could be divided up and used by small businesses, small wood-based businesses. And of course, so if there's equipment that can be rented out or shared, then that's a way of encouraging people to start a business without as much of the risk. Education and training, that's something that we hear a lot about that people are interested in. So those are some of the things that are being looked at there. It's not a CBPP initiative, although we've been involved with them. It's a separate initiative, but it does sort of fit nicely with what we've been working on. So where we're mostly focused on forest management, the hope is that the Breton Forest Innovation Co-op can focus more on sale and creation of market and sale, right? So something that's definitely lacking. So there is a good fit there. Carbon, unfortunately, so I'm sure a lot of you attended the conference last year. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much developed lately. Everything's kind of in a holding pattern. There doesn't seem to be a lot of political appetite for carbon taxes and cap and trade programs in North America here. So anyway, we're kind of in a wait and see mode. If something does develop, we're positioned, we think, pretty well, but so far there hasn't been much today. I think a year ago we were hopeful that we would be able to access the California market through Ontario, but where the Ontario market closed, that's not looking like a possibility. There is some rumors that Nova Scotia does have a cap and trade program for carbon. However, they're not purchasing offset credits from forestry. So there's some rumors that may change, but we'll have to wait and see. Spruce budworm, everybody's favorite bug. I'm sure most of you are probably aware. So Quebec, I don't know if it's classed as an outbreak yet, but there's certainly a lot of damage been happening in Quebec over the last few years from spruce budworm. It has spread, into New Brunswick. So there are outbreaks in New Brunswick. The federal government has committed pretty significant funding towards what they're calling early intervention. So it's based on a very strong detection program, pheromone traps and so on, to find where these epicenters they think are going to be, and then either spraying them with BTK or cutting them. So far, I guess there's early signs that it may be working, but it's not yet clear whether it's the prevention program or the weather that's doing it. So I think last year, trapping results showed that budworm were in decline, but that could very easily be just a blip and a result of winter weather or something like that. So it's a little bit early to tell. Budworm is certainly still a concern, I guess, even though there's some signs that the program may be working. The Leahy report, so we haven't heard much in the news lately. Everything's been Northern Pulp, of course. But there was an independent review of forest practices commissioned by Premier McNeil that was released in the fall of 2018. There was a lot of attention leading up to that release, and shortly thereafter, the report called for increased adoption and implementation of he called it ecological forestry. The province has put out a bit of a response, but mostly focused on Crown land, which I guess moving towards ecological forestry on Crown land is going to no doubt increase harvesting pressure on private land. So there's some concern there for sure. To date, really, there's been no effect on private land other than there's been, I would say, a frustrating delays. So whenever we talk to the province about making changes and adopting new programs and moving forward, the last couple of years, everything has been sort of on hold, waiting for Leahy report, and now things are on hold to see what's going to happen on Crown land. So we're still kind of in limbo in terms of that. So I did mention the Western Woodlot Services Co-op was formed in 2017, largely based on a lot of what we've been doing here in Cape Breton. Central Service Area proposal under development and Eastern Mainland Service Area proposal submitted. So I think the province clearly sees the pilot here in Cape Breton as a success. And I think it's clear that they do want to roll it out in other areas. However, funding, of course, is always the issue there. The system that we developed for managing all of the data and being able to efficiently build management plans. So I know when Pete and I first started with Forest Fiber, it would basically take a week to get a management plan done, whereas now, probably all in all, it takes about a day and a half. So the system has become very efficient, and we've become very good at managing the data associated with that. So we were actually contacted and then contracted by the 7 marketing boards in New Brunswick to develop a similar information system for them. So that's currently under development. They don't have anything like it, and they manage, a lot of woodlots there. So that's something that's very interesting. And the idea being that we would jointly build a system like that based on the existing system for CBPP, but one that's sort of web-based and allows landowners to log in and contractors and so on, which would be available to landowners, contractors, and woodlot groups in both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So it's a little ways away, but it's actually already under development, and funding for the most part is in place for that development. So that's interesting. So we're kind of getting into the point where we're looking for feedback from people, and I'm not sure, I guess we can open it for discussion, or you can put your comments into the chat, or you can email us later. But we're definitely looking for some feedback around this particular issue. So I think Bill will tell you, we've kind of and I've alluded to it earlier, we've kind of outgrown our capacity to provide miscellaneous services. So when we had 100 members, and a certain proportion of them every month or every year will require some kind of support for their woodlot, and we were able to provide that. We've now grown to 400 members with the same budget and the same staff. So obviously something has to give there, right? We can't continue to grow at the rate that we're growing without expanding or increasing the amount of staff that we have. A lot of these things are, it's things like, and there's a lot of examples here, but helping find a boundary line, helping GPS a silviculture area, looking at a site to see if it should be planted, getting a second opinion on an area, whether it should be cut or not, all of those types of things, all of which take time. And there's no one activity here. We just kind of call it miscellaneous. So there's a lot of Bill's time is taken up with that, which is great. It shows that what we're doing is working, because we've got lots of interest and activity from woodlot owners. But at the same time, we need to find a way to manage that better. In general, the province is kind of committed to cover about 50% of the cost of doing things, or the cost of providing support to woodlot owners. So for example, in the case of a management plan, where a woodlot owner covers half the cost, and the province will cover half the cost. So we suspect that in general, when we're talking to the province, there would be the ability to get half of the cost of these things covered if there was a mechanism there somehow where the landowner can cover half of the cost. So, and again, we're looking for feedback on this. We're not sure of the best way to go, and we'd like your opinion, but some ideas is simply charging half of the cost. So if you call as a woodlot owner member, you call up and say, hey, I need help finding this boundary line. There's a mechanism there where we charge you half of what it costs us to do it, and then the province covers the other half. Another way would be increasing membership dues for everybody. So where right now it's $25 per member per year, perhaps we need to increase that and use the revenue from the increased membership dues to cover the cost of going out and providing services to woodlot owners. Another option is sort of a gold card member status. So for many woodlot owners, there's nothing imperative or no impending work for their woodlot. So there's, they wouldn't be getting the value out of an increased membership dues. But for others, the situation is different. So perhaps as a member, you could choose the gold card service and pay more for your membership, but you do get some sort of miscellaneous consulting at the same time. So basically, we're throwing it out there. if you have some ideas, I see some people are commenting already, throw it in the chat, email it to us, or maybe we can sort of open it for discussion here later on. But that is something I think that we need to address this coming year, because we need to make sure that when a woodlot owner calls us for support or help with something, that we're able to provide it. So that's something we need to do. Okay, so that is that. The one second here. So I think is there so the next thing to cover, I guess, is just that sort of woodlot management 101, which you're welcome to stay for if you want. If not, that's fine too. It is, I'll warn you, it is pretty basic. Is there any, if anybody has any comments they'd like to make, you can unmute yourself and let us know. Maybe we'll take a few minutes here to stretch and break and have a quick discussion, and then go on from there. So is there any comments?
Just to jump in, the idea of 50% of cost is appealing. That way you can have the service when you need it, but you're not paying for something you may never use.
Yeah, it does make sense that way. It would be nice if we could come up with a almost a menu, if you will, or something, right? So that at least going into it, okay, if I'm going to have somebody come and look at this to see whether it needs to be planted, you've got some idea of what it's going to cost going into it, rather than just, somebody shows up and you get a bill a week later and you don't really know in advance what it's going to cost.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable idea.
Yeah.
The other thing to support it is if there was some way to do the requests online and, get dates when you'd be available to do the work.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So if you could go online and see available dates and pick one when you would have somebody come and do the service or whatever it is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I happen to be I don't live on the site of my woodlot,
mm-hmm.
So scheduling becomes important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea. I know whenever I'm trying to book a dentist appointment or anything, I always wish that there was a way you could do exactly that. So that's interesting.
And the other thing is, Kerry, being as you have management plans registered with a lot of us, if we made reference to specific stands that we wanted services done, you might be able to ballpark a quote or give us an idea of the cost for the 50% factor.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, that's a good idea. Well, and that makes me think if, so we don't have a big network of service providers, but we do have at least a small network of service providers. So if there was a way of you saying, okay, I'd like somebody to do this, and then you could quickly get and do X work on X day, and you could quickly get, an estimate from somebody what it would be to come and do that. And then we cover. So same idea. We would cover half the cost and you would cover half the cost, but you'd get an estimate or maybe even, if you're lucky enough, a quote from a couple of different service providers.
Yeah, and that would be really useful because, you don't want the sticker shock of, I just had this wonderful treatment done and, I'm now in for, $50,000.
Yeah. A problem, well, I mean, there's a bit of an issue for Richmond County and sort of southern Cape Breton County, where there's there's more people available to do that type of thing in sort of Inverness and Victoria County compared to Richmond and Cape Breton. But so we'd have to somehow affect.
I'm in Victoria, so I'm fortunate that.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a good suggestion. I like that.
And thank you for putting this on. It's very helpful, being as I haven't quite got out to our place in Cape Breton yet. So I'm still stuck here in Ontario. So
Okay, yeah.
it's nice to be able to participate.
Yeah, we've wondered what kind of response we get. So I see we've got 18 people, so that's pretty good. And considering, I mean, for us, this is pretty, now that we know it works or seems to work, it's a pretty low investment, right? So we don't have to rent a hall and buy sandwiches and give up an evening. So maybe it might be worth doing this more often, because
Well,
it is pretty easy to do for us as well.
well, uh, I just wanted to extend my appreciation. I'm actually really looking forward to meeting you. You and I have spoke on the phone a few
Mm-hmm.
times.
Yep.
I just got a little bit longer being stuck here in the city, and then I can go home.
Good.
Gary,
Yes.
do you have time for a related question?
Sure. Yeah, we got time.
For years I worked with Mike Gillis at Victoria, the
Bideck Valley. Yep.
Bedeck Valley. Yeah, sorry. And I wasn't sure, what's the working relationship between your organization and a group like the Bedeck Valley?
Right. Um, so the Cape Breton Private Land Partnership is actually made up of and represented on the board by three woodlot owner groups. One is Bedeck Valley, one is North Inverness Forest Management, and one is Forest Fiber Producers. So it's actually,
Thank you.
yeah. So it kind of, the idea is that it's an umbrella group for those three, so that you as a woodlot owner don't need to know, well, I'm going to call Clifton and North Inverness because I need harvesting, but I'm going to call Mike to get planting done and all of those types of things, right? So
You act
there's,
as a central.
yeah, exactly. So Bill can organize that and make sure that the right work goes to the right person. You as a woodlot owner don't necessarily have to worry about that. But yeah, they are one of three sort of founding members of the partnership. And a lot of the work that gets done through the partnership in Victoria County and sort of northern Cape Breton County is through Bedeck Valley. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I'm just going to have a drink of water and then we'll jump right back in. So just give me 60 seconds and we'll be right back with the sort of introduction to woodlot stuff, which we'll see. It may or may not be interesting, but we'll go through it. And if nothing else, it may spur some more questions. And I think where it's just the 17 people and I'm not getting any feedback or sort of, not feedback, but noise issues, I'm just going to leave everybody unmuted. And if you have a question that you suddenly think of, just jump in and go ahead. So I'll be back in about 60 seconds. Okay, we're back. And let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to go through this. It may be pretty basic for a lot of you, but it may trigger some ideas or questions or thoughts. So if you do have them, just feel free to shout them out. I think we're doing okay for time, so we should be okay. So this is kind of spurred by, we've had a few requests from people that, they're kind of new to owning a woodlot. So it's kind of a introduction to some of the things to start thinking about, or explaining acronyms and all of those types of things, because it is very complicated. When you when you think about it, it's you're kind of expected. It's a large responsibility, and it's a pretty complicated endeavor. So I'm going to skip through the who is CBPP. I think we've kind of covered that one, and then talk a little bit about some woodlot management basics. Some background on a management plan. Talk about what the different treatments are out there. A little bit about the economics, so covering stumpage and those types of things, taxes. A lot of questions we get and concerns is around contracts, so finding the right contractor. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then just some resources and assistance. So if everything's going all right, we're going to post this on the website, so you can always go back and review this later if you want. I'm just quickly scanning here to see if there's anything that we haven't covered already, and I don't think there is. But if there is any questions about CBPP, just let us know. So if you have a management plan, you've probably seen some type of image like this. A lot of what forest management starts with is an aerial photo. So it's a way of looking down at the woodlot from above. And typically any forest will get divided up into what we call stands. So each of those areas that you see there with a number on them, each of those are what we would call a stand. And it's an area where the forest is reasonably similar, and where you would typically, if you were going to do some type of treatment in the forest, you would probably do it to the majority of that area. So it's areas of similar forests that you might treat similarly going forward. That's kind of the basis of everything. In each of those stands, often there'll be measurements taken. So if you're building a management plan, or if you're trying to figure out whether to do a treatment or want to know more about the forest, somebody will do what we call a cruise and record lots of information about it, like tree height. They'll do some measurements to get product volumes, whether that be cords or tons or 1,000 board feet, any number of different measures to make things more confusing. Basal area, we'll come back to that one. That's a very important one. Number of trees per hectare, crown closure, all of those things. So basal area is something that you'll run across fairly often in forestry. So typically it's measured in square meters. And what it is if you can imagine taking all of the trees in a hectare, cutting them off at breast height, and jamming them all into one solid surface, the area of that surface would be the basal area. So it's important for a number of reasons. It's a measure of how dense the forest is. So based on a particular height, a forest can have an optimal basal area. So it may have not enough basal area, or it may have too much basal area. And it's also a way of comparing the proportion of species within a stand. So if you measure by basal area, you have a quick measure of, okay, how much balsam fir is there in this stand compared to how much red maple is there in the stand. So that's what basal area is. It's typically measured using what we call a prism, so a little piece of glass that you can see there. and you stand in one spot and you swing it around. And each time you look at a tree, if the trunk of the tree is in the case on the right hand side, sorry, is displaced far enough away, then you don't count that as in. Whereas the tree on the left hand side, you would count it as in. So if you take that prism and you swing it around and you count all of the trees that are in that plot, and you multiply it by 2, that will give you the basal area of the stand in square meters. So there's a whole lot of math probably involving the refraction in that prism and how that works. But magically, you take it and multiply by 2, and that's going to give you the basal area of your stand. So that's something that's very commonly done when we're out measuring a forest. Crown closure is also an important one. It's kind of a quick way of measuring how dense a stand is. So if you stand in the forest and you look up, and you imagine what percentage of the forest is covered by the crown versus how much is sort of open, then that's your crown canopy. So if you stood in a forest and you could not see the sky anywhere, that would be 100% crown closure. Versus standing in a stand and looking up and seeing about 50% of the sky, then that's 50% crown closure. And it relates back to the density. So if you have a stand that's not dense and could use some more trees or some more growth or shouldn't be thinned, it's probably going to have a low crown closure. Versus a stand that's too thick, it's probably going to have a very high crown closure. So treatments, what we call a treatment is basically some type of intervention in the forest that helps you meet your objectives for it. So common ones, planting, thinning, clear cut, shelter wood, all of those types of things are what we would consider treatments. So this is just a quick map of not sure where that's in the, I hear a dog barking. I think I'm going to just mute everybody.
That's okay, Gary. It's just mine. I'll mute myself.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Hey, Bill.
Finally got in there. Yeah, I'll mute myself. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, so this is just an example. So any one woodlot there may be all different types of treatments prescribed in there. In our system, suggesting that an area is special and should be protected is actually considered a treatment and shows up on the treatment map. But in this particular one, you can see there's some blue there, which is partial cut, green, kind of an ugly green that's crop tree, etc. Management plans, very important for woodlot. It gives you some sense of where you are and where you should be going or hope to be going with your woodlot. Kind of the first step towards managing your woodlot. And if it's done well, it should be based on your objectives for your woodlot. So it shouldn't be based on necessarily what the forester or technician thinks should happen. It should be based on what they think should happen in order to meet your objectives for your woodlot, whether they be economic or wildlife or what have you. Should provide a description of the property, document the landowner objectives for the property. All of those measures that we talked about in each stand, those should be documented and provided. List of treatments suggested, as well as any sort of pertinent background information for the woodlot. Yeah, the process, I mean, typically there's some office work that's done in order to kind of collect any background information that might be available. So for example, are there known historical silviculture treatments that happened on the woodlot that we might get access to? Getting all of the the most up-to-date area of photography that we can, and so on. Then the actual field visit or cruising by somebody where they're going out and visiting each one of the stands, taking those measurements and thinking about, is there something that should be done here? And if so, what is it that should be done? And oftentimes the best thing, maybe no treatment, right? So it's all based on what could best be done to meet your objectives for that woodlot. And then, of course, preparation of the actual document. And the most important part is meeting with the woodlot owner to make sure that they understand it. Just some examples here. Different information from it. Woodlot economics. So silviculture funding, this one is something that we get a lot of questions about because it is very confusing. So in Nova Scotia, there's sort of two main sources of funding for silviculture. One is the Registry of Buyers system, and one is through the Association for Sustainable Forestry. So in Nova Scotia, it's legislated that anybody who purchases more than, actually I think it's 5,000 cubic meters, not 10, from private woodlot owners has to carry out a silviculture program or contribute financially. So for every cubic meter of softwood that they harvest from private land, they have to do $3 worth of silviculture on softwood. And for every cubic meter of hardwood that they purchase, they have to do 60 cents worth of silviculture. So, yeah, I'm not going to comment on why that's different. It should be just as much for hardwood, I think. But anyway, so where they actually do it, what they pay for it, who carries it out, all of those things is not legislated. That's up to the individual registered buyer. What they have to do is at the end of the year submit GIS, sort of digital maps of the areas along with associated documentation that shows that they carried out enough silviculture to meet their obligation for that year. So if in 2018 they purchased 200,000 cubic meters of softwood from private in Nova Scotia, somewhere in the province that year they would have had to carry out $600,000 worth of silviculture. So that's how that works. So in the case of Port Hawkesbury Paper on Cape Breton, that obligation that they have, we have an agreement with them. It's so far been renewed annually to carry out the required silviculture for them, and they provide the funding to us to do that. So that's how that works. Different registered buyers carry it out differently. When you go further towards the center of the province, where sort of there's more competition for wood, often it's kind of used as a carrot. So they will often say, okay, you can get silviculture funding from us only if you sell us your wood, kind of thing. It isn't that competitive here in Cape Breton. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. ASF it's an independent organization that's funded through the province to provide silviculture funding to woodlot owners outside of the Registry of Buyers. So originally the idea was that a registered buyer, if they didn't want to carry out the silviculture themselves, they could take the obligation, the $3 per cubic meter, give the money to ASF, and they would carry out the silviculture for them. Very little money that ASF gets comes through that mechanism. Most, if not all, registered buyers choose to carry out the silviculture themselves, probably because they don't have to do $3 worth of silviculture. They don't have to pay for $3 worth of silviculture. They have to show that they've done $3 in value worth. So there are ways that they can, if they reduce their cost in carrying out that silviculture, then their obligation costs them less, I guess. Whereas contributing to ASF, there's no real way to reduce their cost doing it that way. So, but ASF does get probably in the range of about 1.5 million per year from the province directly to to carry out forestry or to carry out silviculture on private land across the whole province. So they take applications from woodlot owners to get silviculture done. I think they currently charge $100 for an application, so you can apply, but it is going to cost you some money. And the other thing that's a little bit different with them is that with ASF, you're kind of likely to get a little bit of money, but not everything that you need. So they take all of the applications and their budget for the year and proportion it out. So it's a little bit different that way. So we do get funding through ASF, in addition to the direct sort of applications by woodlot owners that they get. They also provide funding directly to woodlot owner groups like CBPP and I guess the Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners, those types. So there's some funding that comes through them as well. Only certain treatments are funded in Nova Scotia, and each treatment category has specific criteria for what qualifies for it. So in order for a registered buyer to claim silviculture credits, it needs to meet specific criteria. So, the guidelines and criteria are preset. So when you go to get silviculture done, it needs to fit into one of those categories, or else there's very little likelihood that you're going to get funding for it. There's some examples here. I won't go through all of them. I guess a comment, particularly on the hardwood, the crop tree release and pruning is something that a lot of people aren't aware of, but it actually is quite a good treatment, especially if you've got sort of, I would call it medium development hardwood. So if you've got hardwood that's, between 10 and 30 centimeters, younger hardwood stands, but older than PCT age, it's quite a good treatment, and it's something that most woodlot owners can kind of do themselves with a chainsaw. You don't need a lot of equipment and those types of things. Anyway, that's an interesting one to think about. So again, just along the economics, the taxes piece. I think I sort of alluded to this earlier, but as a woodlot owner in Nova Scotia, if you can demonstrate that you're an active woodlot owner, and the typical measure of that is whether or not you have a management plan, then you can have your woodlot classed as what's called forest resource exempt. And if your woodlot is forest resource exempt, then the tax rate on it is 20, regardless of the valuation, the tax rate on it is 25 cents per acre. So I know anytime a property is, so there's historically, a lot of woodlot owners were already classed as forest resource exempt, but if it's recently been transferred in any way, so if you've inherited it or purchased it, the default is to change it from forest resource exempt to recreation. And in order to get it changed back to forest resource exempt, you need to go talk to Property Valuation Services, explain that you're a woodlot owner, an active woodlot owner, and you have a management plan, and it's not too hard to get it changed over, as far as in our experience at least. The other piece that I've alluded to is the intergenerational transfer. There are very significant tax implications around that. I'm not going to begin to comment on that. That is something, if that's something that's on your mind. So if passing your woodlot over to your kids in the next while is something that you're thinking about, then it is definitely worth talking to an accountant or professional accountant about it, because there are some very significant implications around active management of a woodlot and how that works. Excuse me. So, continue on the theme of economics. You'll hear the term stumpage. So, stumpage is what a contractor is going to pay to you for the right to cut your wood. So, 99 times out of 100, if harvesting occurs here in Nova Scotia, it's an independent contractor who does it on behalf of the woodlot owner, and the contractor then arranges for sale of the wood to Production Paper, Northern Pulp, etc. So the typical arrangement here in Nova Scotia is that the contractor will pay the landowner what's called stumpage. So they'll look at what they think they're going to get for the wood at the mill. They'll subtract out of that what they think it's going to cost them to cut it. They'll subtract out what it's going to cost them to put in any roads or landings or those types of things. They'll subtract out what they need for profit. And then the result of that is stumpage, or what you get paid for it. A big part of that, so we often get the question, what's stumpage today? Well, it very much depends on the cost to cut the trees. So if you've got lots of big, healthy trees in a large area where, they can spread the cost of moving equipment over a large amount of wood, then the amount that you're going to get paid stumpage is going to be much more than if you've got small wood that's hard to cut and a lower total volume of wood that they can't spread out those overhead costs on. A comment here. So if you are talking to a contractor about getting some wood harvested, it's essential that you make clear exactly what your expectations are. So 9 times out of 10, when somebody's not happy with the result of a contractor, it's often a communication issue and a contract issue. So not being clear up front with what you want done on your woodlot, what you expect it to look like when it's done. Because the contractor is going to take that into account when he's calculating what he's going to pay you. So if you're very concerned about rutting and you want to make sure that any ruts are fixed up when they're done, and you've got a road that you don't want damaged and the contractor needs to fix that up when he's done, then if you can explain that up front, then the contractor can make sure that he understands that and takes that into account when he's calculating what it's going to cost him to cut that wood. So communication is very important, and getting it down in a contract is also very important. Forest treatment options. I think we've covered a lot of this. Sorry, I'm just reading ahead here. Yeah, so I think there's some pretty basic stuff. Planting, typically done after a clear cut, sometimes after a partial harvest. Here in the province, there's funding available for planting of red, black, and white spruce. So if you want to plant hardwood and you want to be funded to do it, you're kind of out of luck. There is, as I mentioned, there is funding available, but you're going to have to kind of make sure you get your name on the list, because typically there's more planting that could be done than there is funding to actually get it done. Weeding. So weeding is typically done at about 2 to 4 years old. So often it's in a stand that's been planted, and you're going to go in and remove sort of the trees that you don't want in the final area, or those that are going to compete with your planted or your sort of desired species. You don't often see it here anymore, but weeding is kind of taken the place of herbiciding. So where herbicide used to be used to sort of kill off a lot of the hardwood, today, at least on private in Cape Breton, weeding is typically used to do that. Pre-commercial thinning. So often it's, many people you'll hear it called spacing. So it's going into stuff that's 10, 20 years old, 2 meters in height, selecting out your crop tree, and then cutting the rest of them. So you want to try and space, depending on the species. There's a different density that you want depending on the species. So black spruce, maybe a little bit tighter. But typically about every 2 meters, you want to leave a good quality tree. It's an excellent tree. So it's a very, considering the the result that you get. It's quite cost effective for the province. Not only does it give you a growth boost, so, you know, in the past, it was always thought of, okay, PCT is something that I'm going to do in order to get more wood on these trees and increase the economic return. It can also be a very good tool in terms of restoration. So if you look at a stand, and typically you may see thick balsam fir as far as the eye can see, but within that stand, often there's a unseen but significant portion of longer lived, tolerant Acadian forest species. So if your objective is to move the forest away from balsam fir and towards more yellow birch, then a PCT could actually take you a significant way towards that. Crop tree release, I kind of mentioned this earlier. We don't see a lot of it, but it is actually a very effective tool, typically done in hardwood or mixed wood stands. And in general, you're picking about 150 of your best trees per hectare. So you're going to walk the stands, and roughly I think it's about every 10 meters is what it works out to. It doesn't have to be exactly 10 meters, but that's sort of the average. You're going to pick a really good quality crop tree that you want to make sure is retained and is reaching its full potential. So that crop tree, at that crop tree, you cut down any of the competing vegetation. So if there's any other trees where the crown is touching the crop tree, they're cut down in order to provide space for the growing tree or the crop tree that you've selected. Pruning can often be done at the same time as the crop trees. So the same trees you leave as a crop tree, you can also prune and get some funding for that as well. So that's when a crop tree is done, often a pruning is done at the same time, just because you're there anyway. So it makes sense. And there's funding available for the pruning. Commercial thinning is something that should really be done a lot more often, but isn't, because it's kind of requires some fairly specialized equipment. So it's smaller harvesting gear that you need to use in order to do it properly. Typically it's done in, 30, 40-year-old wood, and you're removing about a third of the trees. So you're taking out 30% of the standing trees and leaving space for the ones that you leave, and getting some economic return out of the ones that you've harvested already. Often very hard to find a contractor. There is funding available for it though, and it can be done in hardwood or softwood trees. Selection harvesting can be done in hardwood or softwood, but it requires long-lived species, which we have few of here in Cape Breton on the softwood side, unfortunately. So red spruce, white pine, hemlock. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of those out there. There is potential for selection harvesting in hardwood, but it's expensive for a contractor to do. So typically we're not seeing a lot of it out there, or a lot of it being done. But it's something that does have potential. So coming back around, hiring a contractor, some comments and thoughts around that. So silviculture contractors, because there's funding available to carry out silviculture, they're not going to be expecting you to make a payment or to pay them. They will look after finding, either through us or independently, they will look after finding the funding to do the work on your woodlot. That being said, funding is limited, so there's not an unlimited pot. So you probably are going to, if you've got work to be done, talk to us or talk to a contractor, and get on a list, because there may be a little bit of a wait to get it done. Harvesting contractors, in that case, yes, they are paying you stumpage, so they're paying you for the right to sell the wood, cut and sell the wood on your woodlot. Right now, there's not a sort of demand is exceeding supply in terms of harvesting contractors, so it can be very difficult right now to find a harvesting contractor, which means they can be choosy about the woodlots they work on. So if you don't have significant areas of quality softwood, it may be difficult right now to find a contractor, unfortunately. So finding a contractor to do, selection cutting and smaller clear cuts can be difficult. I guess in the past, woodlot owners typically, there was a lot more contractors around, and more woodlot owners knew somebody that they had a personal relationship. They knew that, Joe McDonald down the road was a contractor, and, he seems to have a good reputation, so he's who I deal with. That type of relationship doesn't typically exist anymore, so finding a contractor can be a bit of an intimidating process because it's a big decision. So you're doing something on your woodlot that has decades worth of implications. So it can be a bit scary. A few tips. So make sure you ask for a few different bids, but don't necessarily take what appears to be the best price, right? So as in anything, sometimes you get what you pay for. They should be providing with a written quote and references if requested. Ask lots of questions. Don't be shy. Ask lots of questions. Always ask for a contract. Typically, it's not an issue, and it protects both you and the contractor. So they should be more than willing to provide that. Special requests, as I mentioned this before, make sure they know about that up front before they give you a price, because they're going to need to take that into account when they're calculating what the stumpage is. And last tip is talk to Bill. So as a member, you can request a list of contractors that we work with, along with references and inspection results. So if you talk to Bill, you can get a list of contractors, and he can also provide you with a report that we have that shows a summary of any inspections that we've done on them. So it's a really good reference tool. And we can also provide you with contact information for other people who've had that contractor work on their woodlot. So it's, I think, a very important service that we provide there. So I think this is just kind of winding up here. I think we're gonna, at the very least, post this part of it on the website. So there's some links there to different information that you can look at, different groups that are out there, and different resources that may help you, depending on where you are. Yeah. So I think that's it. So is there any questions, comments, or anything from people? We'll open the floor.
Hi, Carrie. It's Bill. I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. It's kind of good to be in touch with these people that we don't get to see very often.
So I see there was sorry, go ahead.
It's Miles McInnes. I just wanted to, again, thank you for organizing the session. As a resident up in Ontario, this has really been helpful, and there's been lots of good information for me. Mm-hmm. Maybe the older hands know more than I do, but I appreciate it.
Good. Well, I'm glad it was of use. And I guess if after you've had some time to think about it, if there's suggestions on ways we can improve this or other information that we could provide, maybe drop us an email or something. That would be great. Any other questions or comments? Was everybody able to hear things okay? One thing that Bill, and which is why we had the trouble with, Bill had trouble connecting, and I only realized as we went live here, was that there was also the option that we could have and should have provided a phone number that you can call into. So I know if you don't have good internet, you may have had very poor quality audio. So I think next time if we did that, there's a phone number that you could have called into, and we should have provided that. But once we went live, it was too late to back out. So I apologize if the audio quality wasn't very good. Okay, well, unless anybody else has anything super pressing, thank you for your time. If you have any questions or comments, you can drop us a line. We're going to see if this recorded all right and post it on the website. And otherwise, have a great evening. Thank you, everybody.
Night.
Can you hear?
Yes, I can, Bill. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure why